Smile? They are watching. The voice came from his right, low enough to disappear beneath the music and the soft clinking of champagne glasses. Ethan Caldwell turned his head and found a black waitress standing beside his table, one hand holding a silver tray, her expression calm but urgent. "Excuse me," he asked. "Do not look behind you." Naturally, Ethan almost did. The waitress shifted closer, as if checking his place setting. 3 people are walking this way, and judging by their faces, they are not coming to congratulate the bride. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Who are you? Right now?" She glanced toward the approaching guests. "The reason you are not leaving your sister's wedding." Ethan had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions with less confusion than he felt in that moment. Around him, the ballroom glowed beneath crystal chandeliers. 200 guests filled the tables with laughter, music, and conversation. At the family table, every chair was occupied except the one beside him. That empty chair had already attracted more attention than Ethan wanted. Vanessa Reed was now crossing the room with 3 guests behind her, wearing the unmistakable smile of someone who had found a private wound and decided to make it public. Ethan knew that smile. He had seen it at charity galas, board dinners, and family gatherings where curiosity dressed itself as concern. He reached for his jacket. "I can handle this." "I know," the waitress said. "That is not the problem." Ethan looked at her. She nodded toward the dance floor. His younger sister, Claire, stood near her new husband, preparing for their first dance. She was smiling, but her eyes had already found Ethan. She knew him too well. If he stood up now, she would know he was leaving. "Again, you came for her," the waitress said. "Stay for her." Vanessa was less than 20 feet away. Ethan studied the stranger beside him. She looked about 30, with warm brown eyes, neatly styled natural dark hair, and a black catering uniform beneath a server's apron. Her name tag read Naomi Carter. "And what exactly are you suggesting, Miss Carter?" Naomi looked at the empty chair, then at Vanessa, then back at him. "Pretend you are with me." Ethan stared at her. "That is your plan. Do you have a better one?" "Several. Do any of them end without your sister watching you walk out?" That silenced him. Vanessa was 10 feet away now. Naomi set her tray on a nearby service station. "This is either going to be very convincing or very embarrassing." "For whom?" Ethan asked. "Probably me." She untied her apron, folded it quickly, and placed it beside the tray. Then, before Ethan could object, Naomi pulled out the empty chair and sat beside him. Vanessa slowed. So did the people following her. Naomi turned toward Ethan with the relaxed expression of someone returning to a conversation interrupted only moments before. "Sorry I kept you waiting," she said, loud enough to be heard. Ethan understood. He leaned back in his chair. "You took your time. I was working." "That sounds like an excuse." "It is a wedding. Everyone is allowed one." For the first time that evening, Ethan almost smiled without forcing it. Vanessa stopped at the table. Her eyes moved from Ethan to Naomi, then to the folded apron across the room. "Ethan," she said slowly, "you did not mention you brought someone." Naomi smiled pleasantly. Ethan looked at the stranger who had risked her job to occupy a chair no one else understood. "I did not think I needed to." Vanessa's expression changed. Only slightly, but enough. The questions she had been carrying across the ballroom suddenly had nowhere comfortable to land. Naomi rested one hand near her water glass and whispered without moving her smile. "Good. Now keep pretending." Ethan looked across the room at Claire. His sister was still watching. This time, when their eyes met, he did not reach for his jacket. Claire smiled. The music began, and at a table surrounded by people who knew his company, his fortune, and every public detail of his life, Ethan Caldwell sat beside the only person in the room who did not yet know he was a billionaire. 3 hours earlier, Ethan Caldwell had arrived at the wedding alone, and nearly everyone noticed. The venue was an elegant estate outside Atlanta, surrounded by old oak trees and gardens washed in late afternoon sunlight. Valets moved quickly beneath the covered entrance while guests stepped from luxury cars in formal suits and evening dresses. Ethan arrived without an assistant, without a driver waiting nearby, and without anyone walking beside him. He had spent most of his adult life entering rooms where people already knew his name. That afternoon was no different. "Ethan Caldwell," one guest whispered before he had even reached the entrance. Another man introduced himself and immediately mentioned a technology company seeking investors. A distant cousin asked about Caldwell Meridian Group before asking how Ethan had been. Someone else joked about private jets. Ethan smiled when expected, shook hands when necessary, and kept moving. He had not attended a major family gathering in nearly 7 years. He was there for one reason. Claire, his younger sister, found him near the entrance to the ballroom before the ceremony. For a moment, the noise around them disappeared. "You came," she said. Ethan looked at her wedding dress and smiled. "I said I would. You have said things before." The words were honest, but not cruel. Ethan nodded. "I know." Claire studied him as if making sure he was real. Then she hugged him. Ethan hesitated for only a second before returning it. "Do not leave early," she whispered. "I will try." Claire pulled back. "That is not the same as promising." Before Ethan could answer, someone called her away. He watched her disappear into a crowd of bridesmaids and relatives, then adjusted his cuff and entered the ballroom. Naomi Carter noticed him because everyone else noticed him first. She was carrying a tray of champagne when two guests near the bar began whispering. "That is him." "Who?" "Ethan Caldwell, the billionaire." Naomi glanced across the room. She saw a tall white man in a dark tailored suit standing alone while people approached him one after another. At first, she assumed he enjoyed the attention. Then she began listening. "How is the market treating you? Are you still buying companies in Europe? I heard your new headquarters cost more than this entire estate." Question after question. Money, business, influence. Not one person asked whether he was happy to see his sister get married. Naomi moved through the reception, refilling glasses and checking tables. Near the terrace, she heard a woman laugh and say, "Imagine having billions and still coming to a wedding alone." The people around her smiled awkwardly. Ethan was only a few feet away. He had heard every word. Naomi knew because his hand stopped briefly on the back of a chair. He did not turn around. He simply kept walking. That small reaction stayed with her. Later, she saw him standing near a framed photograph of a woman with Claire and a much younger Ethan. A white rose rested beneath it. The card identified the woman as Margaret Caldwell, beloved mother of the bride. Ethan looked at the photograph longer than anyone else had. When a guest approached and asked him about an investment conference, Ethan closed his expression like a door. Naomi understood something then. Everyone in the room recognized him. Very few people were actually seeing him. She returned to work. A bridesmaid needed help finding a missing bouquet. An elderly guest needed water and a quiet chair. A seating card had been placed at the wrong table. Naomi handled each problem and moved to the next. But every time she crossed the ballroom, she noticed Ethan standing a few feet outside every circle of conversation. Then she saw Richard Caldwell, Ethan's father, enter the room. Ethan saw him too. Neither man moved toward the other. The distance between them was less than 30 feet. It somehow felt like 7 years. Naomi Carter had learned to read a room long before anyone paid her to work in one. At 30, she could tell the difference between a guest who wanted attention and one who needed help, between a smile meant for a photograph and a smile meant to hide panic. Weddings made those differences easier to see. Everyone arrived dressed for happiness, but happiness was rarely the only thing they carried. That afternoon, Naomi had already calmed a bridesmaid who thought she had lost the wedding rings, found a quiet chair for an elderly guest feeling overwhelmed by the crowd, corrected 2 misplaced seating cards, and helped a 6-year-old boy find his mother near the garden terrace. None of those moments appeared on the event schedule. They were still the moments that could save an evening. Naomi understood that better than most because she was studying event management at night while working catering shifts during the week. Her classes taught budgets, contracts, staffing, and logistics. Her father had taught her everything else. He had spent 27 years working banquet rooms, hotel ballrooms, and convention halls before he died 3 years earlier. He used to tell her that a perfect centerpiece could not rescue a guest who felt invisible. Naomi carried that lesson into every room she entered. It was why she noticed Ethan Caldwell. Not because of the whispers about billions. Not because of his tailored suit or the way strangers suddenly became friendlier when they learned his name. She noticed the distance. At every gathering, people formed circles. Ethan stood just outside them, close enough to be included, far enough to leave without anyone stopping him. When someone approached, his posture became polished. When they walked away, something in his face disappeared. Naomi had seen that expression before. It belonged to people who had learned how to be surrounded without expecting to be understood. Near the ballroom entrance, a catering supervisor named Melissa handed Naomi a revised table list. "Family table changed again," she said. "Mr. Caldwell wants one chair removed." Naomi looked at the diagram. "Which Mr. Caldwell?" "The father." Naomi followed Melissa's finger. The chair was beside Ethan's seat. "Why?" "Apparently it was reserved in memory of the bride's mother, but he thinks an empty chair looks depressing in photographs." Naomi looked toward the family table. A small white rose rested on the place setting. No plate, no silverware, just the flower. Before staff could remove the chair, Ethan crossed the room. "Leave it." His voice was calm. Melissa stopped. Richard Caldwell turned toward his son. For the first time that afternoon, father and son stood face to face. "Claire does not need an empty chair beside her wedding photographs," Richard said. "Claire put it there, and I am asking for it to be moved." Ethan looked at the white rose, then asked Claire. Richard's expression tightened. "You always did prefer empty seats to difficult conversations." The words were quiet. Naomi still heard them. Ethan did not answer. He simply adjusted the chair so it sat perfectly beneath the table and walked away. Richard watched him go, then turned toward another guest as if nothing had happened. Naomi remained still for half a second longer than she should have. Suddenly, the empty chair meant something different. It was not evidence that Ethan had arrived without a date. It belonged to someone who could never arrive. Later, as the reception began and guests took their seats, Ethan sat beside that chair without touching it. People continued to glance his way. Some saw a billionaire alone at a wedding. Naomi saw a son sitting beside the memory of his mother. And when Vanessa Reed began watching that same empty chair with a smile that made Naomi uneasy, she understood that before the night ended, someone was going to turn grief into entertainment. The first toast began just after dinner, when the chandeliers had dimmed and the last light of evening had disappeared beyond the ballroom windows. Claire sat beside her new husband, smiling as friends told stories about college, missed flights, family vacations, and the first time the couple had met. Ethan listened from the family table. The empty chair beside him remained untouched, the white rose still resting where his mother would have sat. For nearly 20 minutes, the room felt exactly as Claire had hoped it would. Warm, joyful, safe. Then Richard Caldwell stood. The conversations faded. Ethan looked down at his water glass. His father had always known how to command a room without raising his voice. "A wedding reminds us that success is not measured only by what we build," Richard began. "It is measured by who remains beside us while we build it." Guests nodded. Claire smiled carefully. Richard continued. "Family is not something we visit when our calendars permit. Love is not a meeting we postpone until business becomes less demanding." Ethan's fingers tightened around the glass. Naomi saw it from the service station. Richard never said his son's name. He did not need to. Several guests glanced toward Ethan. Claire stopped smiling. "Success means little," Richard said, "if there is no one waiting for you when the room empties." The applause came slowly. Some guests clapped because everyone else did. Others looked uncomfortable. Ethan didn't either. He stared at the white rose beside him. Naomi felt something in her chest tighten. She had worked enough weddings to recognize a toast that had stopped being about the bride. Richard raised his glass to Claire and her husband, then sat down. The music resumed, but the room had changed. Ethan remained still. Claire looked toward him from across the table. "Ethan," she said softly. "Not tonight," he replied. "I did not know he was going to say that." "I know. Please do not leave." Ethan looked at his sister. "I am still sitting here." Claire nodded, but her eyes remained worried. Naomi returned to serving coffee. She told herself it was none of her business. Then Vanessa Reed approached the family table. Naomi had noticed her earlier. Vanessa was the kind of guest who spoke softly when kindness served her and loudly when attention served her better. She stopped beside Ethan with a champagne glass in one hand. "Your father has always had a gift for honesty," she said. Ethan looked up. "Vanessa, I have not seen you in years. There may be a reason for that." She laughed as though he had made a joke. Two other guests drifted closer. "Still working all the time?" she asked. "Mostly. Still avoiding Atlanta? When possible. Still arriving alone?" Ethan's expression did not change. Vanessa looked at the empty chair. "Although I suppose technically you saved yourself a seat." Naomi stopped several feet away. Ethan's hand moved from the water glass to the edge of the table. That chair is for my mother. Vanessa's smile faltered for only a second. Of course. I was only teasing. Then find something funny. One of the guests looked away. Vanessa should have stopped. She did not. You know, people have wondered about you for years. A man with your success, your resources, your entire world, and yet no one ever seems to be beside you. Ethan pushed his chair back. Across the ballroom, Claire was being called toward the dance floor for her first dance with her husband. She looked toward Ethan. Naomi saw both of them at once. The brother preparing to leave. The sister silently asking him not to. Vanessa leaned closer. Still saving seats for people who are not coming, Ethan? Naomi set down her tray. She had spent years learning that events rarely fell apart because of flowers, music, or food. They fell apart in moments when everyone saw someone hurting and decided it was safer not to interfere. Ethan reached for his jacket. Naomi started walking toward him. Naomi reached Ethan before he could take a second step. Smile, she said quietly. Ethan turned toward her, his jacket still in one hand. What? They are watching. Her eyes moved briefly toward Claire, then toward Vanessa and the guests gathered nearby. Do not look behind you. Ethan studied her face. I can handle this. I know. Naomi lowered her voice. But if you walk out now, your sister will remember watching you leave during her first dance. That stopped him. Across the ballroom, Claire stood beside her husband as the opening notes of the music began. Her eyes were still on Ethan. Naomi saw the conflict in his face. He wanted distance. Claire wanted her brother. Vanessa wanted a reaction. You have about 5 seconds, Naomi whispered. For what? To decide whether you want to win an argument or stay for your sister. Ethan looked at her as if no one had spoken to him that directly in years. Vanessa was approaching again. Naomi took a breath. Pretend you are with me. That is your solution? It is the fastest one. You are working. I noticed. You could lose your job. Then make this convincing. Naomi placed her tray on the service station, untied her black apron, folded it quickly, and set it down. Then she walked to the empty chair beside Ethan. For one brief moment, she hesitated. The white rose was still there. She did not touch it. Instead, she moved the chair only a few inches, preserving the place setting exactly as Claire had arranged it, and sat carefully beside Ethan without disturbing the memorial. Sorry, I kept you waiting, she said. Ethan understood immediately. You took your time. Some of us have jobs. I have heard of those. Naomi almost smiled. Vanessa stopped beside the table. Ethan, she said, looking directly at Naomi. I thought you were leaving. Ethan placed his jacket over the back of his own chair. You were mistaken. Apparently. Vanessa looked at Naomi. And you are. Naomi opened her mouth, but Ethan answered first. Someone who knows when a conversation has ended. Vanessa's smile tightened. I was only concerned. No, Ethan said calmly. You were curious. There is a difference. The guests beside her suddenly found the dance floor more interesting. Vanessa glanced at Naomi's folded apron on the service station. Recognition crossed her face. She works here. Naomi remained still. Ethan did not. And, one word, nothing more. Vanessa had no answer that would not reveal exactly what she thought the problem was. Claire's first dance began. The ballroom lights softened, and guests turned toward the floor. Vanessa finally stepped away. Naomi released a breath. You are welcome. Ethan looked at her. You lied to a room full of people. I changed the subject. By sitting beside a stranger. You looked harmless. That is a first. Naomi glanced toward Claire. Ethan followed her gaze. His sister was smiling now. Not the careful smile from earlier. A real one. Stay until the song ends, Naomi said. After that, you can decide what kind of brother you want to be tonight. Ethan looked back at her. You always speak to guests this way? Only the difficult ones. For the first time all evening, Ethan laughed. It was quiet, but genuine. Naomi stood as the song neared its end. I should get back to work before someone notices. I think someone already has. Across the room, Melissa, the catering supervisor, stood beside the service station staring at Naomi's folded apron. Her expression was not curious. It was furious. Naomi's smile disappeared. Ethan followed her gaze. Let me handle it. Naomi picked up her apron and tied it around her waist. No, you may be disciplined because of me. Then tell the truth if they ask. Ethan frowned. You do know who I am, do you not? Naomi looked at him. A man who almost walked out of his sister's wedding. Then she turned and walked toward her waiting supervisor, leaving Ethan beside the empty chair with a realization that unsettled him more than Vanessa's questions ever could. Naomi Carter had risked her job to protect a stranger, and she still had no idea that the man she had just saved could buy the entire catering company without changing his plans for Monday morning. Melissa waited until Naomi reached the service station before speaking. "What exactly were you doing?" Her voice was controlled, but the anger beneath it was obvious. Naomi tied her apron securely around her waist and picked up her tray. "Helping a guest. By sitting at the family table? For less than 5 minutes. You abandoned your section." Jasmine covered 2 tables. I asked her before I stepped away. Melissa folded her arms. "You are not an event coordinator, Naomi. You are a server. Your job is to follow the service plan, not improvise because you think you understand the guests better than everyone else." Naomi absorbed the words without looking away. A guest was about to leave during the bride's first dance because another guest was deliberately embarrassing him. "I made a judgment call. That was not your judgment to make. Then write me up for it." Melissa blinked, surprised by the calmness of the answer. "Do not make this worse." "I am not trying to." Naomi lowered her voice. "I am telling you exactly what happened." Melissa looked toward the family table. Ethan was no longer sitting down. He was walking toward them. "Wonderful," she muttered. "Now the guest wants to complain." Ethan stopped a few feet away. "Actually, I came to make sure you had the correct information." Melissa immediately straightened. "Sir, I apologize for the interruption to your evening. This employee acted outside our service standards." She prevented an interruption. Melissa hesitated. "I am sorry. I was preparing to leave. My sister was about to begin her first dance." Miss Carter recognized the situation and gave me a reason to remain seated until the moment passed. Melissa looked. "Between them, your sister." Before Ethan could answer, a man from the wedding party approached and extended his hand. "Mr. Caldwell, I wanted to thank you for the foundation grant. Claire told me what your company did for the hospital." Melissa's expression changed instantly. Naomi noticed. Ethan noticed too. "Of course," Ethan said, shaking the man's hand. "Tonight is about Claire." The man smiled and moved away. Melissa stared at Ethan. "Caldwell." "Ethan Caldwell." The color shifted in her face. "Mr. Caldwell, I had no idea." "That should not matter." Melissa opened her mouth, then closed it. Ethan continued. 5 minutes ago, you believed Miss Carter had broken protocol. Now you know my name, and suddenly you are worried about whether I am satisfied. The facts did not change." Naomi watched him carefully. "I can personally assure you there will be no complaint," Ethan said. "In fact, her judgment kept me from leaving an important family moment." Melissa nodded quickly. "Then there is no problem." "There is," Naomi said. Both of them turned toward her. Naomi held Ethan's gaze. "Do not make them respect me because they are afraid of you." Melissa looked stunned. Ethan was silent. Naomi continued. "I stepped away from my assigned section. I had a reason, and Jasmine covered the tables, but I still made that decision. If there is a normal review process, follow it. Just do not erase the rules because he is wealthy." Ethan had spent years around people who wanted him to use his influence for them. Naomi was the first person he could remember asking him not to. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "Tell the truth. Nothing more." So Ethan did. He explained what Vanessa had said, why he had been preparing to leave, and how Naomi's intervention had kept him in the ballroom for Claire's first dance. Melissa listened. When he finished, Naomi added, "And I should have notified you before leaving my section. I did not have time, but I understand why that matters." The anger left Melissa's face, replaced by something more thoughtful. "You should have told me," she said. "I know. But Jasmine confirms your tables were covered." Naomi nodded. Melissa exhaled. "Finish the shift. We will discuss it Monday." "Fair enough." She walked away to check the dessert service. Ethan remained beside Naomi. "You could have let me solve that in 10 seconds. Naomi picked up her tray. "That is exactly why I did not." "Why?" "Because if your name changes the rules, then the rules were never fair." Ethan had no immediate answer. Naomi stepped past him, then paused. "Besides, you still owe your sister the rest of the evening." Ethan looked toward Claire, who was laughing with her husband near the dance floor. "And you?" "I have 87 guests waiting for coffee." She walked away before he could respond. Ethan watched her move through the ballroom, calm and focused, as if the last 15 minutes had been ordinary. They were not. He had spent most of his life believing power meant having the ability to change an outcome. Naomi Carter had just shown him another kind of power, the ability to refuse an advantage when accepting it would cost someone else their dignity. By the time the wedding cake had been served, the ballroom had softened into the kind of happiness that only appeared after the formal schedule was over. Jackets rested on chair backs. Children slept against their parents. Claire moved from table to table with her husband, laughing more easily now. Ethan stayed. He spoke with relatives he had avoided for years, danced once with his sister when she insisted, and even remained polite when 3 different guests tried to discuss business. But his attention kept returning to Naomi. She moved through the room with the same quiet awareness she had shown all evening, noticing empty coffee cups before guests asked, and solving small problems before they became large ones. Near 10 o'clock, Ethan found her outside the ballroom beside a quiet service corridor, checking a list on her phone during a short break. "Do you ever stop working?" he asked. Naomi looked up. "Do you?" "Apparently not, according to everyone in my family." She put away her phone. That sounded almost like a joke. "I am trying something new. Careful. People may expect it again." Ethan leaned against the wall several feet away, leaving her space. "I wanted to ask you something. You already know I am not accepting a reward." That was not the question. Naomi waited. Ethan looked toward the ballroom doors. "Why did you notice?" "Notice what?" "That I was going to leave." Naomi considered him for a moment. "Because you kept looking at the exits." "That's simple." No, her expression changed. "You want the honest answer?" "I have had enough polite answers for one evening." Naomi nodded. "My father worked banquet service for 27 years. Hotels, weddings, conferences, charity dinners. Rooms like this one." Ethan remained quiet. "When I was a kid, he would come home and tell me stories about people nobody else noticed. The nervous groom who spent 20 minutes hiding near the kitchen. The widow who attended her first wedding alone after 40 years of marriage. The executive everyone wanted to meet who ate dinner without one real conversation." Ethan looked at her. Naomi continued. "He used to say, never confuse being surrounded with being seen." The words settled between them. "Your father sounds wise." "He was." The past tense was gentle, but Ethan heard it. "I am sorry." "Thank you." "He died 3 years ago." Naomi looked through the open doorway toward the ballroom. "After that, I started paying more attention to what he had been trying to teach me. And tonight you decided I needed rescuing. I decided your sister deserved to finish her first dance without watching her brother disappear." Ethan almost smiled. "That is less flattering." "It is also true." "And the rest?" Naomi met his eyes. "Everyone in that room knew your name. Nobody was looking at your face." Ethan said nothing. "They saw the billionaire," she continued. "They saw the company. They saw someone they could impress, criticize, or ask for something. But every time someone mentioned money, you looked like you had left the conversation before your body did." Ethan looked away. No consultant, board member, friend, or family member had ever described it that clearly. "You do this with every guest?" he asked. "No. Most guests are easier." There it is again. "What? You calling me difficult?" "You are." Ethan laughed softly. Then his expression grew serious. "My mother used to be the person who noticed." Naomi did not interrupt. "When she died, I buried myself in work. My father called it ambition. Then he called it abandonment. Eventually, I stopped correcting him." "And your sister?" "She kept calling." "Did you answer?" Ethan looked toward the ballroom, where Claire was laughing beneath the chandeliers. "Not often enough." Naomi nodded, not with judgment, but understanding. "Then maybe tonight is not about the people who stopped seeing you." Ethan looked at her. "Maybe it is about the person who never stopped trying." Before he could answer, applause rose from inside the ballroom. Claire was calling family members together for a photograph. Ethan saw Richard standing near her, leaving a careful distance where his son should have been. Naomi picked up her phone. "Your sister is waiting." Ethan did not move immediately. What if 7 years is too long? Naomi looked toward the family gathering, then back at him. 7 years is too long to keep waiting. It is not too late to take the next 20 feet. Ethan followed her gaze. 20 feet. That was all that separated him from his father. 20 feet, and 7 years of silence. This time, when Ethan walked back into the ballroom, he was not looking for the nearest exit. The family photograph should have taken less than a minute. Instead, it became the moment 7 years of silence finally ran out of places to hide. Claire stood beside her husband beneath an arch of white flowers while relatives gathered around them. Richard took his place near the front. Ethan approached from the edge of the ballroom and stopped beside his sister. Claire looked at him, then toward Naomi in the distance. Naomi had already returned to work. She did not smile or signal. She simply continued clearing coffee cups as if walking 20 feet had been entirely Ethan's decision. Maybe that was why it mattered. "Ready?" the photographer asked. Claire reached for Ethan's hand. Almost. She looked at her father. "Dad, stand next to Ethan." Richard hesitated. So did Ethan. The room seemed to hold its breath. "Claire," Richard said, "this is not the time. Actually, it is my wedding, so I think I get to decide what time it is." Her husband tried not to smile. Ethan did. Barely. Richard stepped closer. The photographer raised the camera, but Claire lifted one hand. "Wait." She looked between her father and brother. "I am not taking another family photograph where everyone pretends everything is fine." Ethan felt the word before he understood why. Pretend. For most of the evening, pretending had protected him. Now Claire was asking him to stop. Richard sighed. "We are not doing this here." Ethan looked at his father. "That is what we always say." Richard turned toward him. "You are the one who left. I moved to New York for work. You stopped coming home. Because every time I did, you turned my life into an evaluation." Claire remained between them, silent now. Ethan continued, his voice calm. "When the company struggled, you called me irresponsible. When it succeeded, you said I had become obsessed with money. When Mom died, I worked because I did not know what else to do, and you decided that meant I did not care." Richard's expression hardened, then weakened. "Your mother died, and you disappeared. I was standing right there." Ethan's voice dropped. "You just did not recognize the way I was grieving." The ballroom noise continued around them, but the small circle of family seemed separate from it. Richard looked toward the memorial chair at the table. "I lost my wife. And I lost my mother." Ethan paused. "But somehow only one of us was allowed to be broken." Claire lowered her eyes. Richard said nothing. Ethan could have stopped there. For years, silence had been easier. Then he remembered Naomi's words. Everyone knew his name. Nobody was looking at his face. "I built the company because work was the only place where I understood the rules," Ethan said. "At home, nothing I did was enough. If I stayed, I was failing. If I left, I was selfish. If I succeeded, I cared too much about business. So eventually, I stopped trying to explain myself." Richard looked older than he had earlier that evening. "I thought you chose the company over us. I thought you had already decided I did." Claire stepped closer to both of them. "And neither of you asked me what it was like to spend 7 years calling one brother and one father who refused to call each other." That landed harder than either man expected. Richard looked at his daughter, then at Ethan. "I did not know you felt that alone," he said finally. Ethan held his father's gaze. "You never asked." There was no dramatic apology. No instant repair. Some wounds were too old for one conversation to close. But Richard nodded slowly. "Then I should have." Ethan felt something shift. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But space for it. Claire wiped one tear from her cheek and looked at the photographer. "Now we can take the picture." Richard stood beside Ethan. Their shoulders did not touch, but for the first time in 7 years, neither man stepped away. The camera flashed. Across the ballroom, Naomi looked up for only a moment. She saw Ethan standing with his family instead of near an exit. Then she returned to her work. Ethan saw her too. Hours earlier, she had asked him to pretend he was not alone. Now, standing beside the people he had spent years avoiding, he understood that the hardest part had never been finding someone to occupy an empty chair. It was having the courage to stop pretending he did not care who was missing. By midnight, most of the guests had gone home. The band was packing its equipment, the chandeliers had been dimmed, and the ballroom that had held 200 voices now carried only the quiet sounds of staff clearing tables. Ethan remained at the family table. Claire had left with her husband after hugging him twice and making him promise to answer her call the next morning. Richard had departed 10 minutes later, but not before stopping beside Ethan and saying, "I will be in Atlanta next Thursday." Ethan had looked at him. "So will I." It was not forgiveness. It was an appointment. For now, that was enough. The white rose still rested on the place setting beside Ethan. He looked at it until a cup of coffee appeared in front of him. "You look like someone who has had a long evening," Naomi said. Her black apron was still tied around her waist, though the shift was nearly over. Ethan looked up. "I was told. Weddings were supposed to be relaxing. You were given terrible information." Naomi began collecting empty glasses from the table. Ethan glanced at the chair beside him. Do I still have to pretend you are with me? Naomi stopped. For a second, the room seemed quieter. Then she smiled. No. Ethan nodded as if he had expected that answer. Naomi lifted another glass. But you could ask. Ethan looked at her, surprised. Would you sit for a minute? Naomi checked the ballroom. Melissa was supervising the final cleanup near the entrance. 1 minute. She did not sit in the memorial chair. Instead, she pulled another chair from the neighboring table and placed it beside Ethan, leaving the white rose untouched. Ethan noticed. Thank you, he said. For the chair? For knowing which one not to take. Naomi sat down. Some seats belong to memories. My mother would have liked you. You cannot possibly know that. She liked people who disagreed with me. Then I would have been her favorite. Ethan laughed. This time, there was no audience and no reason to pretend. What happens Monday? He asked. Melissa and I discuss my 5-minute career as an unauthorized wedding guest. And after that, Naomi looked toward the ballroom. I finish my event management program in 4 months. Then I start applying for coordinator positions. At Caldwell Meridian? No, Ethan raised an eyebrow. That was fast. Because if you offer me a job tomorrow, I will spend the next 10 years wondering whether I earned it or whether you felt grateful. Ethan considered that. What if you apply through the regular process? Then I expect the same standards as everyone else. You really do make everything difficult. I learned from a difficult guest. For months later, Naomi completed her program. She applied for 7 event management positions, including one with a hospitality company partnered with Caldwell Meridian Group. Ethan removed himself entirely from the hiring process. Naomi completed 3 interviews, presented an event recovery plan, and earned the position on her own record. When she received the offer, Ethan sent one message, congratulations. She replied, see, you can. Help by staying out of the way. Claire called Ethan every Sunday after the wedding. Most weeks, he answered. Richard came to Atlanta that Thursday. The first conversation lasted 40 minutes and solved almost nothing. The second lasted 2 hours. By the 5th, father and son could mention Margaret without one of them changing the subject. 6 months after the wedding, Ethan attended a charity dinner in Chicago. The room was filled with executives, donors, and people who knew exactly how much his company was worth. As he approached his assigned table, he noticed an older man standing alone near the edge of the room, holding a place card and pretending not to be uncertain about where he belonged. Ethan stopped. Once, he might have walked past. Instead, he pulled out the empty chair beside his own. Sir, Ethan said, I think there is room here. The man smiled and sat down. Across the room, no one applauded. No one even noticed. That was the point. Months earlier, a waitress had sat beside a billionaire for 5 minutes because everyone else was watching him and nobody was seeing him. She had not changed his life with money, influence, or power. She had simply noticed the moment he was about to disappear and chosen not to let him leave unseen. Ethan had spent years believing belonging was something other people either gave you or took away. Naomi taught him something simpler. Sometimes belonging begins when one person pulls out a chair, and sometimes the person who once needed that chair learns to pull it out for someone else.